Juliana knew something was wrong the moment she heard the door open. It was barely morning. The digital clock on the stove blinked 7:04 a.m. The numbers burned into her vision after a sleepless night. The coffee in her mug had gone cold hours ago, but she hadn't moved. She hadn't needed to. Every second since midnight had stretched endlessly, filled with the same question looping through her mind.
Where are you?
Keys rattled against the entryway table.
Familiar sounds. Normal sounds.
The kind that should have meant comfort. Instead, they landed like insults.
You're overreacting.
Tyler's voice drifted in from the hallway, casual and detached, as though nothing about this morning, or the night before, was out of place. As if he hadn't missed her birthday. As if he hadn't vanished without a word. Juliana stayed seated at the kitchen table. Tyler appeared in the doorway moments later. His hair was rumpled, his shirt wrinkled. He looked tired but not guilty. That was the part that hurt the most.
No panic.
No shame. No urgency to explain. Megan called me last night, he said, already defending himself. Around 8. She was having a panic attack. I couldn't just ignore her. Juliana stared at the table instead of him. At a faint scratch in the wood she didn't remember being there before. Maybe it always had been. You didn't answer your phone, she said quietly. I called you 6 times. It was on silent, he replied with a shrug. I didn't see them until this morning. Her birthday. Reduced to an inconvenience. Tyler stepped farther into the kitchen, lowering his voice the way he did when he wanted to sound reasonable. She's having a hard time right now. Her dad's sick. She just needed someone to talk to. Juliana was 29 years old. She'd been married for 3 years. Long enough to recognize the difference between honesty and performance. This was the latter. Polished. Rehearsed. Empty. Something inside her shifted, not sharply, not dramatically, but with a quiet finality.
Like a door closing without a slam.
She looked down at her left hand.
The wedding ring caught the light, tin gold, once cherished.
She remembered the day he'd slid it onto her finger, promising forever with a smile that now felt like a trick of memory. Without a word, she pulled the ring off and placed it on the table. The soft click echoed louder than any argument. Tyler stopped talking. His expression flickered from irritation to confusion, then to something resembling concern. What are you doing?
Juliana stood.
Her heart was racing, but her legs were steady. She walked past him toward the hallway, close enough to catch a scent that didn't belong to her.
Floral. Sweet. Chush.
Juliana, he said sharply. What is this? She didn't answer. Silence was the first boundary she'd set in years. As she opened the bedroom door, memories rushed in uninvited, of who she'd been before Tyler. Loud. Opinionated.
Unapologetic.
A woman whose laugh once filled rooms.
Somewhere along the way, she'd learned how to shrink.
Now, standing in the doorway of the life she was about to dismantle, Juliana felt something unfamiliar but powerful rising in her chest. Clarity. And she didn't yet know how far the truth would go, but she was about to find out. Juliana thought taking off the ring was the hardest part. She had no idea the real betrayal was still waiting to be uncovered.
Juliana zipped the suitcase harder than necessary.
The sound cut through the bedroom like a warning, sharp and final. Tyler hovered behind her, pacing in tight circles, his frustration growing louder with every unanswered question. So you're just leaving? He demanded. Without even talking this through? Juliana folded a sweater with care, smoothing the fabric the way she used to smooth over arguments. Old habits tried to surface. She pushed them down. I'm listening, she said calmly. You're just not saying anything new. That seemed to irritate him more than anger would have. He raked a hand through his hair. This isn't how marriage works. You don't just walk out when things get uncomfortable. She paused, hands stilling around a pair of jeans. Slowly, she turned to face him. You spent my birthday with your ex-girlfriend, she said evenly. That's not how marriage works either. For a moment, he had nothing to say. Juliana returned to packing, her mind drifting backward without permission. She remembered when Megan's name first entered their relationship, slipped into conversation 6 months after they started dating. High school sweetheart, Tyler had said.
4 years together.
The kind of bond that never really disappears. Juliana had smiled then, proud of herself for being mature. Adults could be friends with their exes. That was what confident women believed. Looking back, the warning signs glowed like flares she'd chosen to ignore. Late-night phone buzzes Tyler would tilt away from her. Casual mentions of coffee meetups that left her feeling uneasy for reasons she couldn't articulate. The time she'd found a single earring in his car. Silver, unfamiliar. That must be from before you, he'd laughed. You're overthinking it. She'd believed him. Belief was easier than suspicion. The suitcase was nearly full now. Tyler followed her into the bathroom, blocking the doorway. At least explain what you think is happening. Juliana met his gaze, really looking at him for the first time in months. Maybe years. I think you've been asking me to be okay with things that hurt me, she said. And I finally stopped being okay. She brushed past him and crossed the hall toward his desk. The laptop sat open, glowing softly, as if waiting.
Juliana hesitated.
She had never gone through his things. Trust had been her line in the sand. But trust only worked when it wasn't being exploited. Her fingers moved almost on their own. She remembered noticing months ago how messages synced across his devices. A text labeled Mom had popped up once while she was walking past. She'd assumed it was his mother. Now, curiosity hardened into resolve. She clicked. The thread opened instantly. Last night was perfect. I missed you. Me too. I'll tell her I had a work emergency. She doesn't suspect anything.
Julie's clueless.
Always has been. Juliana felt the air leave her lungs. She scrolled. And scrolled. Months turned into years. Anniversaries.
Business trips.
Photos she wasn't meant to see. Hotel rooms, reflections in mirrors, Tyler's arm around Megan's waist. Her birthday wasn't an exception. It was routine. He'd been lying to her since before the vows. During them. After them. Behind her, footsteps approached. Juliana snapped the laptop shut, her hands trembling as she grabbed her suitcase. You're really doing this?
Tyler scoffed.
Walking out without letting me explain? She looked at him once, really looked. There's nothing left to explain. She walked out the door carrying the weight of the truth, and leaving behind the man who thought she'd never look closely enough to find it. Juliana thought leaving was the end, but the evidence she'd just seen was only the beginning of what she would uncover. Juliana checked into the hotel just after noon. The room was small, impersonal, and smelled faintly of detergent and lemon cleaner, but it was quiet. Blessedly quiet.
No questions hanging in the air.
No explanations demanded. For the first time in years, she didn't have to wonder where Tyler was or which version of the truth he'd offer when confronted. She set her suitcase down and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall until her phone vibrated. Then vibrated again. And again. Tyler's name filled the screen in relentless succession. She didn't answer. She already knew the rhythm of his messages.
First confusion.
Then anger. Then apologies crafted to sound sincere. Finally, blame disguised as concern. She muted the thread and lay back, exhaustion finally claiming her. The next morning, Juliana drove to her mother's house.
The familiar driveway felt like a lifeline.
As soon as the door opened, the mask Juliana had worn for years cracked. Words spilled out, about the birthday, the lies, the messages, the names he'd called her when he thought she'd never see. Her mother listened without interrupting, her face calm but eyes shining with unshed tears. I knew something was wrong, she said softly when Juliana finished.
I saw it every time you come home.
I just didn't want to push you before you were ready. Juliana nodded. I kept thinking if I tried harder, he'd finally choose me. Her mother took her hands. You were never the problem. He just didn't deserve your loyalty. 3 days later, Tyler showed up. Juliana stepped outside before he could ring the bell. He stood at the end of the driveway holding roses, her favorite, with an expression she recognized immediately. Carefully rehearsed remorse. Jules, please, he said. Can we talk? She crossed her arms. About what? About fixing this, he replied. Marriage isn't disposable. You don't give up just because things get hard.
For a moment, the familiar pull tugged at the air. The memory of good days.
Laughter.
The man she thought she'd married.
Then the words flashed in her mind.
Julie's clueless.
Always has been. You've been sleeping with Megan for our entire marriage, Juliana said flatly.
There's nothing to fix.
His expression faltered.
That's not true.
I read the messages, she replied.
All of them.
Silence stretched between them. Finally, he exhaled sharply. Okay. Fine. I made mistakes. But that doesn't erase everything we had. Was it real when you were texting her during our wedding reception? She asked. He didn't answer. Megan was just a weakness, he said instead. An old habit.
It didn't mean anything.
Juliana laughed. But there was no humor in it. If it didn't mean anything, why did you lie for 3 years? Because I knew you'd react like this, he snapped.
You always overreact.
There it was. Even now, caught in the truth, he made it her fault.
I want a divorce, Juliana Said.
Tyler's face drained of color.
You're not serious. I've never been more serious.
She turned and walked back inside, closing the door behind her. Through the window, she watched him stand frozen before finally retreating to his car. That afternoon, Juliana contacted a divorce attorney named Bethany. As she laid out the affair, the lies, the messages, Bethany listened carefully. Do you still have access to those messages? Yes, Juliana said. I took screenshots of everything. Good, Bethany replied. That's going to matter more than you realize. Juliana left the office with a strange new feeling in her chest.
Risolve.
Juliana thought the worst was over, but once the legal process began, she would discover just how deep Tyler's deception really went. That night, Juliana logged into their joint bank account. She hadn't planned to. The intention was only to distract herself, to keep her hands busy while her thoughts raced. But once the screen loaded, a quiet unease settled in her chest. They'd always kept their finances mostly separate. It had seemed practical at the time, modern, even. One shared account for household expenses, everything else individual. Tyler had insisted on it early in the marriage, framing it as a sign of trust. We don't need to watch each other, he'd said.
Juliana scrolled.
The balance was lower than she expected. At first, she assumed it was nothing. Groceries. Utilities. A delayed bill. But the longer she stared, the less sense it made. There were withdrawals she didn't recognize. Amounts that didn't match any recurring expenses. Transfers to an external account she'd never seen before. Her pulse quickened. She pulled up the transaction history and started tracing dates. Restaurant charges in parts of the city she'd never visited with Tyler. A hotel charge on a weekend he'd claimed to be at a sales conference. Then something else caught her eye.
A jewelry store.
Nearly $800. Juliana frowned and instinctively touched her neck. She didn't own an $800 necklace. She barely owned jewelry at all. Tyler had always joked that she was low maintenance, as if that were a compliment rather than a convenience. Her stomach twisted as realization crept in. She opened another tab and logged into their credit card account. Tyler's card, the one tied to his business expenses. She'd never questioned it before. Why would she? Now, the statements told a story she hadn't wanted to read. More hotels. More restaurants. A weekend trip to Austin that definitely wasn't a conference. No reimbursement from his company. No receipts submitted. He hadn't just been lying to her. He'd been funding his affair with their money. With her money.
Juliana sat back in the chair, the room spinning slightly.
She thought about her job, the long hours, the promotion she'd worked for, the stability she'd brought into their marriage. Tyler liked to joke that she was the responsible one. Turns out, she'd been the financier too. Her phone buzzed on the desk.
Tyler.
Jules, please. I know I messed up, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Therapy. Counseling. Anything. Don't throw away everything we built.
Everything we built.
Juliana didn't respond. Instead, she opened a new folder on her laptop and began saving screenshots.
Every transaction. Every transfer.
She cross-referenced dates with the messages she'd already captured. When a hotel charge matched a night he'd claimed to be with friends, she noted it. When a restaurant bill aligned with a text saying "can't wait to see you tonight," she highlighted it. By the time she finished, the folder was thick with evidence. 30 pages. Not just of an affair, but of deliberate, systematic betrayal. She emailed everything to Bethany with a short message. Let me know what else you need. When Juliana finally closed the laptop, the sun was setting outside the window. She stepped onto her mother's back porch, letting the cool evening air steady her. The anger was still there, but it had changed shape. It wasn't sharp anymore. It was focused. Useful. Tyler had believed she wouldn't notice. That she wouldn't question. That she wanted peace more than truth. He was wrong. For the first time since walking out of the apartment, Juliana felt something close to control returning. Not over him, but over her own life. And she was just getting started. Juliana had uncovered the financial betrayal, but she had no idea that Tyler's lies were about to escalate in a way she never expected. The divorce papers arrived 3 weeks later. Juliana knew the exact moment Tyler received them because her phone erupted. Missed calls. Texts stacked on top of each other like falling dominoes. You're making a huge mistake. You're really going to regret this. I never thought you'd be this vindictive. She set the phone face down on the table and made herself tea.
Camomile.
Her hands were steady now in a way they hadn't been before. Silence, she'd learned, was the only language Tyler couldn't twist. 20 minutes passed. Her phone buzzed again. Can we please just talk? Juliana didn't reply. What she hadn't anticipated was the retaliation. It started subtly. Her mother mentioned that Tyler had stopped by while Juliana was out, tears in his eyes, talking about misunderstandings and second chances. He'd framed himself as heartbroken, confused, desperate to save his marriage from a wife who was pulling away. Then her brother Caleb called. He texted me, Caleb said carefully. Said you've been really stressed lately. That you might not be thinking clearly.
Juliana closed their eyes.
Even now, Tyler was trying to control the narrative. The final line was crossed 2 days later. Her boss, Patricia, asked her to step into her office. I got an unusual phone call this morning, Patricia said, folding her hands on the desk. Your husband wanted to express concern about your emotional well-being. He suggested your personal situation might be affecting your judgment at work. Juliana felt heat rush to her face. He called you here? He said he was worried, Patricia replied, studying her expression. Would you like to explain what's going on? For years, Juliana would have minimized, protected him,
Smoothed the edges.
but that instinct was gone. My husband has been cheating on me throughout our entire marriage, she said evenly. I filed for divorce. He's trying to regain control. Patricia's face softened. I'm sorry you're dealing with that. And for the record, one phone call won't change my opinion of your work. Relief washed through her, followed quickly by anger. That afternoon, Juliana called Bethany. He's contacting my family. My workplace, Juliana said. Is there anything I can do? Document everything, Bethany replied without hesitation. Messages, calls, voicemails. If this continues, we can raise harassment. Judges don't look kindly on intimidation. It was during that conversation that Bethany mentioned something unexpected. I reviewed the property records, she said. The down payment on the apartment, it came entirely from your personal savings, correct? Yes, Juliana answered. Tyler didn't have much saved at the time. And you discussed him contributing more to the mortgage afterward?
Juliana hesitated.
We talked about it, but never put it in writing. Bethany paused. Because he hasn't been contributing more. You've both paid exactly 50%. Juliana's stomach dropped. I never noticed. That's common, Bethany said gently. You trusted him. But legally this matters. Your equity is significantly higher, especially combined with evidence of misused marital funds. For the first time since the divorce began, hope sparked. Tyler hadn't just betrayed her emotionally. He'd left a trail, one that could cost him far more than he realized. That evening, Juliana wrote out a list. Not of revenge, but of boundaries.
What she wanted from the divorce.
What she refused to accept anymore. The apartment.
Reimbursement. A clean break.
Tyler had spent years treating her trust like a weakness. Now, it was becoming her leverage. Juliana thought Tyler's manipulation had reached its peak, but the evidence Bethany uncovered next would change the entire case. 2 weeks later, Bethany called with a tone Juliana hadn't heard before. Focused.
Sharp.
I subpoenaed Tyler's financial records, she said. And something interesting came up. Juliana straightened in her chair. How interesting? The external account you flagged, the one the transfers were going to, it isn't just his. Juliana's grip tightened around her phone. It's a joint account, Bethany continued.
Tyler and Megan.
Opened a little over a year ago. The words landed slowly, each one heavier than the last. He's been funneling money there consistently, Bethany said. Not just small amounts. Hundreds at a time. Sometimes thousands. This wasn't careless spending. It was intentional.
Juliana closed their eyes.
A year. That meant Tyler had been planning.
Strategizing.
Building a separate financial life with another woman while sharing a bed with his wife and letting her pay half the mortgage. He was stealing from the marriage, Juliana said quietly. Yes, Bethany replied. And that changes everything. Bethany explained the next steps carefully. In Texas, asset division didn't have to be equal if fault could be proven. Infidelity combined with financial misconduct was significant. Powerful. I'm filing a motion for unequal division, Bethany said. We'll argue that you retain full ownership of the apartment and receive reimbursement for the diverted funds. Juliana felt something loosen in her chest. Not relief exactly, but validation. That evening, Tyler's name lit up her phone again. Why are you doing this to me?
I'm losing everything. You don't have to destroy my life just because you're hurt.
Juliana stared at the screen, a bitter laugh escaping her lips.
Destroy his life.
He'd drained her savings. Lied through vows. Mocked her behind her back. And now that consequences were finally arriving, he wanted mercy. She didn't respond. Instead, she forwarded the messages to Bethany and added them to the growing file. The retaliation escalated quickly. Tyler began leaving voicemails, long, rambling monologues that swung wildly between apology and accusation. 1 minute he was begging. The next he was furious. You're turning everyone against me, he snapped in one message. You're telling people things that should have stayed private. This is harassment.
Juliana almost laughed at the irony.
When Tyler's sister texted accusing her of abandoning the marriage, Juliana didn't argue. She sent a single screenshot.
One message from the wedding night.
She looked happy at the reception. Felt a little bad, honestly. There was no reply. But 2 hours later, Tyler left another voicemail. This one seething. You had no right to share that. Juliana forwarded it too. Behind the scenes, Tyler's carefully managed image was unraveling. His mother called him in tears. His friends stopped inviting him out. Megan, apparently realizing the situation was no longer secret or romantic, stopped responding to his messages altogether. For the first time since Juliana had known him, Tyler wasn't in control. And that terrified him. The court date was scheduled for 6 weeks out. In the meantime, Juliana focused on herself. Therapy appointments. Long walks. Relearning what it felt like to exist without bracing for disappointment. She felt lighter. Clearer. Tyler, meanwhile, was unraveling publicly. Every angry message, every attempt to manipulate, every reckless outburst only strengthened her case. He was documenting his own downfall. Bethany called again one afternoon. I think you should prepare yourself, she said. This hearing won't go the way he expects.
Juliana looked out the window, sunlight spilling across the floor.
4 years, Tyler had counted on her silence. Now the truth was doing all the talking. With the court date approaching, Juliana believed she was ready, but nothing prepared her for what Tyler would try next inside the courtroom. The morning of the hearing arrived quietly. Too quietly. Juliana sat in the passenger seat of Bethany's car, hands folded in her lap, watching the courthouse grow larger through the windshield. She'd expected nerves, sweaty palms, racing thoughts, but what she felt instead was a strange calm. The kind that settles in once a decision has already been made and there's no turning back. Inside the courtroom, Tyler was already seated at the opposite table. He looked different.
Thinner. Taut.
His suit was crisp, but it didn't hide the tension in his jaw or the way his knee bounced uncontrollably beneath the table. When he noticed Juliana, his eyes narrowed, not with sadness, but with something closer to resentment. She met his gaze briefly, then looked away. Bethany leaned toward her. Remember, she said softly, You don't need to react to anything he says.
Let the evidence speak.
The judge entered, and the room rose as one. Tyler's attorney began aggressively, painting a picture of a marriage that had simply fallen apart. He implied Juliana was emotionally volatile, overwhelmed by stress, prone to impulsive decisions. He suggested Tyler's actions, while imperfect, were being exaggerated by a hurt spouse seeking revenge.
Juliana listened without flinching.
Then Bethany stood. She started with the finances. Printed statements were passed forward. The joint account with Megan. The transfers. The jewelry purchase.
The resort hotel.
Each transaction was dated, highlighted, and explained. The pattern was impossible to ignore. Tyler's attorney objected repeatedly. The judge overruled him just as often. Bethany moved next to the messages. She didn't read all of them. She didn't need to. She selected carefully.
The ones from the wedding day.
The ones showing the affair wasn't a mistake. It was a lifestyle. The ones where Tyler referred to Juliana as clueless, confident she'd never discover the truth. Tyler stared straight ahead, his face rigid. When the judge finally addressed him directly, the room felt smaller. Mr. Harrison, she said, is there anything you'd like to say in response to this evidence? Tyler glanced at his attorney. The man gave a subtle shake of his head. There was nothing to say. The judge leaned back, reviewing her notes. When she spoke again, her voice was firm. She ruled in Juliana's favor on nearly every point. Juliana would retain full ownership of the apartment. Tyler would reimburse over $12,000 in misappropriated funds. He would receive no claim to Juliana's retirement accounts. It was over. Outside the courtroom, Tyler caught up to her in the hallway. I hope you're happy, he said bitterly.
You ruined my life.
Juliana stopped and turned to face him. Once, that accusation would have crushed her. Now, it barely registered. You ruined your own life, she replied calmly. I just stopped covering for you.
She walked away.
6 months later, Juliana stood in the apartment, her apartment, and surveyed the space. The walls were freshly painted. The furniture rearranged. Sunlight filled rooms that once felt heavy. The divorce was finalized. Tyler had paid.
Megan was gone.
And Juliana felt something she hadn't felt in years. Free. She opened the windows and let the breeze rush in, carrying with it the certainty that her future finally belonged to her. Juliana believed the story had ended in the courtroom, but healing, she soon learned, was its own battle entirely. Healing didn't arrive all at once. Juliana learned that within the first few weeks after the divorce was finalized, she'd wake up some mornings feeling light, almost euphoric, as if the weight she'd carried for years had finally lifted. Other mornings, the quiet pressed in on her chest, heavy and unexpected. Freedom, it turned out, had an adjustment period. She started therapy 2 weeks after the hearing. Not because she felt broken, but because she didn't want to carry unexamined damage into the rest of her life. Her therapist, a calm woman with observant eyes, asked questions Juliana hadn't known how to answer at first. When did you stop trusting your own instincts? When did you start believing peace was more important than honesty? Those sessions were exhausting. Some days, Juliana left feeling raw, like a scab had been torn open. Other days, she left lighter, pieces clicking into place. She began to understand how subtly Tyler had reshaped her world, how compromise had turned into silence, how love had turned into endurance. At home, the changes were physical as well as emotional. She painted the bedroom a muted sage green, a color Tyler had always dismissed as depressing. Now it felt calming.
Intentional.
She replaced the heavy curtains he'd chosen with sheer ones that let the morning light pour in. Small acts, but each one reclaimed space. Friends began to reappear. Not all at once, some sheepishly, some apologetically. Juliana realized she'd faded from many relationships long before the marriage ended. Not because anyone had pushed her out, but because she'd grown tired of explaining why she was always tired, always distracted, always making excuses for someone who never showed up. She didn't hold it against them. One Friday night, she went out for dinner with an old friend she hadn't seen in years. They laughed the way they used to, loudly, unapologetically. Halfway through the meal, her friend paused and smiled. "There you are," she said. "I was wondering when you'd come back." Juliana excused herself to the restroom and cried. Not from sadness, but recognition. She also started painting again. The supplies had sat untouched in a closet for years, boxed up after Tyler had once called it a cute phase. Now she spread canvases across the living room floor, paint smudging her hands, music playing too loudly. There was no audience. No judgment. Just movement and color and release. Her mother noticed the difference immediately. During a Sunday visit, she watched Juliana move around the kitchen. Confident, present, humming softly to herself. When Juliana turned, she found her mother wiping at her eyes. "There you are," her mom said.
I was scared di lost you.
Juliana hugged her tightly. "I was lost," she admitted. "But I found my way back." Not every moment was easy.
Certain songs still stung.
Certain memories surfaced without warning. But when they did, Juliana no longer questioned herself. She trusted what she felt. She let it pass. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't building her future around someone else's limitations. She was building it around her own truth. And she was just beginning to understand how much space that created. Just when Juliana thought she'd reached peace, a message from her past threatened to reopen wounds she believed were finally healed. The message arrived on a Tuesday afternoon. Juliana was standing in line at the grocery store, half focused on a list scribbled on her phone, when the notification appeared. A name she hadn't seen in months. A name she'd hoped would stay buried.
Tyler.
Her stomach tightened instantly, a reflex she hated that her body still remembered. She didn't open it right away. She paid for her groceries, walked to her car, and sat behind the steering wheel with the engine off, breathing slowly until the initial rush of adrenaline faded. Then she read it. "I know I shouldn't be reaching out. I just wanted to say I've been doing a lot of thinking. I owe you an apology."
Juliana let out a short, humorless laugh.
Of course he did. She stared at the screen, reading the message again. It was carefully written. No accusations, no obvious manipulation. Just remorse. Or at least the appearance of it. "I hurt you in ways I didn't understand at the time. I see that now. I hope you're doing well." There it was.
The soft ending. The open door.
Juliana locked her phone and started the car. That night, she brought the message up in therapy. Her therapist listened quietly, then asked, "What do you feel when you read it?"
Juliana thought for a moment.
"Annoyed," she said. "And tired." "Tired of what?" "Tired of him wanting access to me," Juliana replied. "Even now." They sat with that for a moment. "You don't owe him closure," her therapist said gently. "Sometimes people apologize to relieve themselves, not to heal the person they hurt." That truth settled deeply. At home, Juliana poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker on one by one. She thought about the version of herself who would have replied immediately. Who would have tried to keep the peace. Who would have wondered if this apology meant something had finally changed. That woman felt distant now. She typed a response, then deleted it. Typed another. Deleted that too. Finally, she wrote a single sentence.
"I've moved, onorevole, please don't contact me again."
She stared at it for a long moment before pressing send. The silence that followed felt different from before. Not heavy. Not anxious. Clean. Days passed. Then weeks. Life continued to expand in small, steady ways. Juliana signed up for a weekend art workshop. She accepted a last-minute invitation to a road trip with friends. She started saying yes to things without mentally calculating how someone else might react. One evening, as she cleaned out a drawer in the bedroom, she found her old wedding ring tucked into a small box she'd forgotten about. She turned it over in her palm, surprised by how little emotion it stirred. It wasn't a symbol of loss anymore. It was evidence of survival. She closed the box and placed it back in the drawer. Not hidden, not displayed. Just stored. A chapter acknowledged, but no longer lived in. Later that night, Juliana stood on her balcony, the cool air brushing her skin. She thought about how far she'd come from the woman who'd sat at a kitchen table watching the clock tick past midnight, waiting for a man who never truly arrived. She no longer waited. And she no longer wondered what might happen next with fear. She wondered with curiosity. Juliana believed she'd finally closed the door on her past, but the next encounter would test just how strong her boundaries really were. Juliana ran into him on a Saturday morning. It was the last place she expected, her favorite cafe, the small one tucked between a bookstore and a florist. She'd been coming there for weeks now, claiming the corner table by the window as her own. It was part of a routine she'd built carefully, brick by brick. She was stirring oat milk into her coffee when she sensed movement beside her.
Juliana.
Her name, spoken in that familiar voice, sent a brief jolt through her chest. She looked up slowly.
Tyler stood there holding a paper chap, eyes uncertain, posture stiff.
He looked different again, less angry than before, but also less sure of himself. Like a man who'd lost the script he'd relied on for years. "I didn't know you came here," he said awkwardly. "I do," she replied, keeping her tone neutral. There was a pause, heavy and uncomfortable. People moved around them, ordering drinks, laughing softly, living lives untouched by their history. "I saw you and thought, maybe we could talk," Tyler said.
Just for a minute.
Juliana considered him. Not the man she'd married, not the villain of her memories, just the person standing in front of her now. "No," she said gently. He blinked, clearly not expecting that. "I already asked you not to contact me," she continued. "This includes in person." His jaw tightened. "I'm not trying to cause trouble. I just wanted you to see that I'm doing better. I've been going to therapy."
I'm working on myself.
She nodded once. "That's good. But," he pressed, "but that doesn't involve me anymore." For a moment, irritation flickered across his face. "You really don't think we could ever be civil? Friendly?"
Juliana almost smiled.
"You're confusing peace with access," she said. "I have one.
You don't get the other."
Silence fell between them again. Tyler shifted his weight. "You know, I didn't realize how much you did for me until you were gone." She met his eyes calmly. "I did." That seemed to deflate him more than anger ever could. He nodded slowly, as if finally understanding something too late. "Well," he said, clearing his throat, "I guess I'll let you enjoy your coffee." "Please do," Juliana replied. He walked away without looking back. Juliana exhaled, surprised to find her hands weren't shaking. Her heartbeat remained steady. No spiral.
No second guessing. Just certainty.
She finished her coffee, gathered her things, and stepped outside into the bright afternoon sun. The encounter lingered in her mind, not because it hurt, but because it proved something important. She had changed. That evening, she wrote about it in her journal. Not about Tyler, but about herself. About how boundaries weren't walls meant to punish others, but doors you chose when and if to open. A few weeks later, something unexpected happened. Juliana was offered a new role at work. A leadership position that would require travel, creativity, and long-term planning. The kind of opportunity she would have hesitated over before, worried about how it might inconvenience someone else. This time, she didn't hesitate. She accepted. As she hung up the phone, a quiet excitement bubbled up inside her. Not the anxious kind, the hopeful kind. She was building something new.
Something honest.
And for the first time, the future didn't feel like something to survive. It felt like something to step into. Just when Juliana felt fully grounded in her new life, an unexpected opportunity, and a risky decision, would challenge everything she thought she was ready for. The opportunity scared her more than she expected. Juliana sat at her kitchen counter that night, laptop open, the offer letter glowing on the screen. The position was everything she'd worked toward. Higher responsibility, real influence, a chance to shape projects instead of just executing them. It also came with frequent travel and visibility. The kind of role people noticed. The kind of role Tyler had always quietly discouraged. She could almost hear his voice in her head. "That sounds like a lot. Are you sure you're ready?" Not concern, doubt, disguised as protection.
Juliana closed the laptop.
She realized something then that made her chest tighten. Fear didn't feel new because the job was risky. It felt familiar because she'd spent years being taught to second-guess herself. That night, she called her mother. "I got offered a promotion," Juliana said. "A big one." "That's wonderful," her mom replied immediately. Then more gently, "You sound unsure." "I am," Juliana admitted. "It would change a lot. Travel. Long hours. I don't know if I'm ready. Her mother was quiet for a moment. Do you remember when you were 8, she said, and you were terrified to ride your bike without training wheels? Juliana smiled faintly.
You made me do it anyway.
I didn't make you, her mom corrected. I reminded you that you already knew how.
Juliana hung up feeling steadier.
The next morning, she accepted the position. The weeks that followed were a blur of onboarding meetings, strategy sessions, and preparation for her first work trip. Juliana thrived in the structure. She liked the clarity of expectations, the confidence people placed in her. Each small success reinforced something she'd almost forgotten, that she was capable. On her first trip, standing alone in a hotel room overlooking a city she'd never visited before, Juliana felt a quiet pride settle in. No one was waiting on her return. No one questioned her priorities. She ordered room service, kicked off her shoes, and laughed softly at how peaceful it felt. But growth, she learned, didn't come without friction. During a team dinner, one of her colleagues casually asked, "So, are you married?" Juliana hesitated only briefly. "I'm divorced," the woman said, flustered. "Sorry." "It's okay," Juliana replied, surprised by how true it felt. "It really is." Later that night, alone again, she thought about how far she'd come. Not just from Tyler, but from the version of herself who believed her value was tied to being chosen, to being accommodating, to being easy to love. She was still unlearning that. Back home, life settled into a new rhythm. Mornings filled with purpose. Evenings filled with choices. She reconnected with old hobbies and discovered new ones. She felt whole. Then, one evening, she received an email that made her pause. It was from Megan. The subject line read simply, "I owe you the truth." Juliana stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. Not with fear, but with curiosity. She hadn't thought about Megan in months. Not really. She didn't open the email right away. Instead, she sat back and asked herself a question she'd learned to trust. Do I want this information, or do I already have enough peace? The answer wasn't immediate. But she knew one thing for certain. Whatever Megan had to say would no longer define her story. She was no longer the woman things happened to. She was the woman who decided what mattered next. Juliana thought she'd left the past behind, but Megan's message threatened to reveal a truth that could change how she saw everything. Juliana waited 2 days before opening the email. Not because she was afraid of what it might say, but because she wanted to be sure she was reading it from a place of strength, not reaction. That alone felt like progress. On the third evening, she sat on her couch with a cup of tea and clicked open the message.
Juliana.
I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not even sure I deserve to be heard. But I need you to know that I didn't learn the full truth until everything fell apart. Juliana read slowly, her face unreadable. Megan wrote about lies stacked on top of lies. About how Tyler had told her the marriage was basically over long before it actually was. How he'd claimed they were roommates in name only. How he'd promised separation papers were coming. Just not yet. I believed him, Megan wrote. Not because I was proud of it, but because I wanted to.
Juliana felt no anger reading the words.
Just a dull acknowledgement. She'd already known this, in some shape or form. Megan went on. She explained the joint account. Said Tyler had framed it as temporary, a way to plan for a future he insisted was inevitable. She claimed she hadn't known the money came directly from marital funds until Bethany's filings forced everything into the open. I ended things when I realized how deep the manipulation went. The email continued. I'm in therapy now. I'm not reaching out to excuse myself. I just couldn't keep carrying this without saying something. Juliana leaned back against the couch. There it was. The truth Megan felt compelled to offer. It didn't change anything. Juliana typed a response. Then paused. Deleted it. Thought again. Finally, she wrote. I appreciate you telling me. I've moved on, and I don't need further contact.
I wish you clarity.
She sent it without hesitation. The relief that followed surprised her. Not because the exchange had been heavy, but because it wasn't. The past no longer had hooks in her. It didn't pull. It didn't demand. That realization stayed with her in the days that followed. At work she was thriving. Her confidence was no longer performative. It was rooted. People sought her input. Valued her perspective. She noticed how different it felt to be respected without having to earn it through self-erasure. One evening, after a long day, she stood in front of her bathroom mirror and really looked at herself. Not critically. Honestly. She looked older than she had 3 years ago, but also clearer. Like someone who had been through something and come back sharper, not smaller. She thought about how long she believed strength looked like endurance. How she'd worn patience like a badge of honor, even when it cost her peace. Now she understood something different. Strength looked like walking away without theatrics. Like choosing silence over explanation. Like not needing everyone to understand your decision in order to stand by it. Juliana opened her journal that night and wrote a single sentence across an empty page.
I no longer confuse love with sacrifice.
She closed the notebook feeling settled. For the first time, the story felt complete. Not because every loose end was tied, but because she no longer needed answers to move forward. Still, life had a way of testing new truths. And Juliana was about to face a moment that would ask her, quietly, firmly, who she was becoming next. Juliana believed she had finally made peace with the past, until a new connection forced her to confront what she was truly ready for. The invitation came from someone she didn't expect. Juliana was halfway through a busy Tuesday when her calendar notification chimed. Dinner, Friday 7 p.m. She frowned, scrolling for details. The invite was from Daniel, a colleague she'd worked closely with over the past few months. He was thoughtful, sharp, and unfailingly respectful. They'd shared long meetings, late-night brainstorming sessions, and easy conversation, but nothing that crossed a line. Until now. She sat back in her chair, considering. It wasn't fear that gave her pause. It was awareness. For the first time, she wasn't rushing toward connection to fill a silence. She was deciding whether she actually wanted one. That evening, she brought it up in therapy. What do you feel when you think about going? Her therapist asked.
Juliana searched inward. Curious, she said slowly.
But cautious.
I don't want to lose myself again.
That's not a bad instinct, her therapist replied. The question is whether you're protecting yourself or avoiding growth. The difference mattered. On Friday night, Juliana chose a simple dress and arrived at the restaurant early. Daniel was already there, standing as she approached with an easy smile.
No grand gestures.
No pressure. Dinner flowed naturally. They talked about work, travel, books. He listened, really listened, without interrupting or steering the conversation back to himself. When Juliana mentioned her divorce, he didn't flinch or pry. Thank you for telling me, he said simply. I appreciate honesty. Something in her chest loosened. Still, she stayed present. Alert. She noticed how she didn't feel the urge to impress him or over-explain herself. She wasn't shrinking, or performing. After dinner, they walked outside, the city humming around them. I don't want to make assumptions, Daniel said, stopping near the corner. But I'd like to see you again. If that feels right to you. Juliana appreciated the way he left space in the sentence. It does, she said after a moment.
As long as we take it slow.
He smiled.
Slow works for me.
As she drove home, Juliana reflected on the night. Not with butterflies, but with clarity. She hadn't given anything away. She hadn't ignored any inner warning bells. She'd stayed rooted in herself. That felt new. Over the following weeks, they saw each other occasionally. Coffee. Walks. Conversations that unfolded without urgency. Juliana noticed how different this felt from before. There was no rush to define things. No pressure to be anything other than who she was. Still, doubts surfaced late at night. She wondered if she was ready. If she trusted herself enough to recognize red flags. If she might slip back into old patterns without noticing. One night, she stood in her kitchen staring at the window, reflections overlapping in the glass. Past and present versions of herself blurred together. She whispered aloud, I trust me. The words felt tentative but true. Juliana understood now that healing wasn't about erasing fear. It was about not letting fear make decisions for her.
She wasn't chasing love.
She was allowing it, carefully, consciously. And for the first time that felt like strength instead of risk. Juliana believed she had learned how to open her heart safely. But one unexpected moment would force her to confront whether she was truly ready to let someone see all of her. The moment came quietly. No argument.
No dramatic confession.
Just an ordinary evening that shifted something inside her. Juliana and Daniel were sitting on her couch, shoes kicked off, a half-finished movie playing in the background. They'd been seeing each other for a few months now. Slowly, intentionally. There were boundaries, conversations, check-ins. Nothing felt rushed.
Nothing felt hidden.
That was what unsettled her. Daniel reached for her hand absent-mindedly, his thumb brushing against her knuckles as he laughed at something on the screen. The touch was gentle, familiar, but instead of warmth, Juliana felt a sudden tightening in her chest. Not fear of him. Fear of herself. She pulled her hand back slightly, enough for him to notice.
Hey,
he said softly, turning toward her.
You okay? Juliana hesitated.
Old instincts flared, the urge to dismiss, to smile, to say I'm fine and swallow whatever discomfort had surfaced. That reflex alone told her this moment mattered. I need to tell you something, she said. Daniel muted the TV immediately, giving her his full attention. Juliana took a breath. Sometimes, when things feel safe, I get scared. Not because of what's happening, but because of what happened before. He nodded, not interrupting. I'm afraid of disappearing again, she continued. Of slowly adjusting myself until I don't recognize who I am. The silence that followed wasn't tense. It was spacious. Thank you for telling me, Daniel said. What do you need when that feeling shows up? The question surprised her. Not how do I fix it? Not are you sure you're ready? Just, what do you need? I need honesty, she said after a moment. And patience. And permission to say when something feels off without it becoming a problem. Daniel considered that, then nodded. That's reasonable. And I can do that. Something loosened in her chest then, not because the fear vanished, but because it was met instead of dismissed. Later that night, after he left, Juliana sat alone in the quiet apartment. She replayed the conversation in her mind, not with anxiety, but with curiosity. This was new territory.
Not love as endurance. Not love as sacrifice.
But love as presence. Still, she knew better than to romanticize growth. Healing didn't mean she'd never feel triggered again. It meant she recognized it when it happened, and chose differently. A week later, she attended a work event out of town. During a networking dinner, a senior executive pulled her aside and praised her leadership. Mentioned long-term opportunities. Global projects. Driving back to the hotel afterward, Juliana felt that old, familiar voice stir.
Don't get too big.
Don't ask for too much. Make sure you're still easy to love. She pulled the car over and sat there, hands resting on the steering wheel. No, she said aloud. I don't do that anymore. She sent Daniel a message, not for reassurance, but for connection. I had a good day. I'm proud of myself. His reply came quickly. You should be. Back home days later, Juliana stood in her living room, sunlight spilling across the floor, and felt something close to peace. Not fragile, not tentative. Earned. She understood now that readiness wasn't the absence of fear. It was the ability to stay present when fear showed up. She wasn't the woman she used to be. She was someone new. And she was finally ready for what came next. Juliana thought she had reached her strongest version, but the final choice she faced would define who she was becoming. The choice didn't arrive as a crossroads. There was no dramatic ultimatum, no moment that demanded she pick one future over another. Instead, it unfolded slowly, over weeks filled with ordinary decisions, each one quietly reinforcing who Juliana had become. She noticed it in the mornings, when she planned her day without factoring in someone else's moods. In meetings, when she spoke with certainty instead of cushioning her opinions. In relationships, when she said no without apology and yes without fear. One evening, after a long day, Juliana sat at her dining table with her journal open. She'd been writing less lately, not because she had nothing to process, but because life no longer felt like something she had to untangle just to survive it. She flipped back through older pages. There were entries filled with doubt. Pages where she questioned her own memory, her own reactions, her own worth. She barely recognized the woman who had written them, not because she felt superior to her, but because she understood her now. That woman had been doing her best with the information she had.
Juliana closed the journal gently.
Later that night, Daniel came over for dinner. They cooked together, moving easily around the kitchen, music playing softly in the background. There was no performance, no anxiety about how the night should go. Just comfort. Presence. After they ate, Daniel leaned against the counter and studied her thoughtfully. "Can I ask you something?" he said. "Of course. What does a good future look like to you?"
The question lingered in the air.
Juliana didn't answer immediately. She considered it carefully, not out of fear, but respect, for herself, for the truth. "It looks like a life where I don't abandon myself," she said finally. "Where I don't shrink to be chosen. Where love adds to my world instead of replacing it." Daniel smiled, not possessively, not expectantly. "That sounds like a future I'd want to be part of," he said. "If you decide you want that too." She appreciated that he left the choice with her. After he left, Juliana stepped onto the balcony and looked out at the city lights. The air was cool, grounding. She thought about everything she'd endured, betrayal, loss, disorientation, and how none of it had broken her the way she once feared. It had clarified her. She'd learned that love wasn't proven through patience with pain. That loyalty didn't mean silence. That trust began not with another person, but with herself.
Juliana smiled softly.
For the first time in her life, she wasn't chasing certainty. She was choosing alignment. She went back inside, locked the door, and turned off the lights, feeling at home in her own space, her own skin, her own future. Tomorrow would come with its own challenges, its own decisions, its own risks. But she would meet them as herself, fully, honestly, without apology. And that was the victory she'd once believed was impossible.